who's going to impress upon us the importance of this day. And now, with due respect to our chief guest, our principal, our teachers, and everyone present here, I, Meghna Anand of class 9A, call upon our principal sir, Shri Mahipal Singh, to address and welcome our chief guest, Professor Bindu Amat of Providence Women's College, Calicut. Sir, please.
Okay.
Good morning to one and all. Today discussions and debates, conducts quizzes and leads workshops on communication skills and leadership trainings. Mrs. Bindu Amat is alumni of KV2 Calicut. Once again, I welcome today's special guest, Mrs. Bindu Amat. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Now,
I would like to express my views on reading. Is it important to read books? Of course it is. If you feel depressed, lonely or annoyed, you can just grab a book and start reading it.
Thank you, Angel. That was interesting. We shall now have the highlights of Reading Month celebration from our library sir, Mr. Krishnan TK. Sir, please.
Good morning to all. Good morning, Madam Bindu Madam and Principal Sir and dear friends, children. Before going to present the highlight, I request Lizzie Madam, our senior most primary teacher and in charge HM, to launch the collection of videos in a book review format video, which will be conducted summer reading competition for the primary as well as the senior secondary and senior secondary section. I request Madam to launch the collections. Just take it. Okay. Okay. These are the collection of the book review by the different students. Good morning. Today, actually, this 19th June, we are celebrating National Reading Day, and following the month, we are celebrating a National Reading Month also. Generally, in this month, we are launching a one-year program for the current academic year related to library activities. We are conducting various programs. This is the second webinar in this connection, and coming Monday, another webinar going to organize under the title of Creative Writing. And the main objective of all these programs to not only to create an awareness about the importance of reading, but also to enhance students' critical and creative thinking. Of course, in the present world, there is a general question is that, what is the benefit of reading? If you want to get an answer in terms of monetary or financial benefits, definitely there is a no benefit in that terms. But if you think in a higher thinking, there is a lot of benefits. In this context, there is I do remember there is a dialogue in one of the most important Malayalam novel, Manushyanne Oru Amugam by Subhash Chandran. A dialogue between one of the character Govindan Master and with his grandchild Jidin. It may be relevant in this context. It goes like this. Jeevidathinte abhayasthanamaganam kathayum kalakaranam. ആ അർത്ഥത്തിൽ ഏതു കലയും ഒരു ബോധോദയമാണ്, ഏതു കലാകാരനും ഒരു ബുദ്ധനും. So all these students are joining. So how this reading and reading related activities, how to improve and how to create a new vision of life. Of course, in this year we are also going to launch a special program that is a film and literature. We have already launched a collection of short films in the virtual library, and we are also going to conduct a lot of program related, like including that book film review, etc. And around 117 films are now available in the virtual library. That is almost all films are national, regional, and national and international, including Oscar Award film also there. And also, we are going to conduct a lot of workshop also in coming year. That's all today. Now we can start the program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we all look forward to our chief guest, Professor Bindu Amat, for an inspiring talk. Please, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Meghna. Thank you, Krishnan sir, for this invitation. Thank you to all the teachers, the principal and the teachers of KV number 2, who have given me this wonderful opportunity to spend some time with you on this very important day, reading day, or the reading week, this day, which is part of your reading week celebration. It is with much joy that, I recall my KV memories. Seeing your Rajni ma'am, I was transported in time back to those days when we were students like you, walking along the corridors of KV number 1. It goes without saying that I remember our teachers, principal, Vijayalakshmi ma'am, who inspired the love of reading in us in a way that no one else could or can. And also remember with special fondness our dear library ma'am, Sadi ma'am, who kept the doors of the library always open to us and made reading a habit, inculcated the habit of reading in every one of us. And it is with much respect, therefore, that I take my hat off to people like Krishnan sir, who've been doing such wonderful work. I was just looking at the presentations that have been compiled, and it is tremendous. It is wonderful to see the library stepping out of the space that we call the library and creating a network of reading, of books, and bringing people together into this wonderful world of reading. On that happy note, let me begin my maybe half an hour talk with you. I have made a special presentation for you, so allow me to make the presentation. Just give me a moment to get the presentation ready. I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, madam.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so I have called my presentation, or decided to call my presentation, Frampton's Bibliotheket. It sounds almost like a Tharuresque word, but meaning will dawn on us as I take you through this journey. Let us now enter the big woodlands of reading. Okay. To begin with, I think I will tell you a story, because we are dealing with reading day or reading week. And it's only right that we spend some time looking at a little delightful story that I will share with you by reading out bits of it, which I have got on my computer in the form of an ebook. This is actually a story which belongs to the Alexander cycle, or the Sikandar cycle, as it is known in some other languages. Very popular series of stories told and retold many times by many authors. And I have chosen today to read out bits from a story written by a young story writer, or a young writer named Kanishk Tharoor. The word Tharoor comes back now. Yeah, indeed, he is the son of one of the sons of Shashi Tharoor, and he is a writer, who's making waves in the world of reading now, particularly with this collection called Swimmer Among the Stars. And in that collection, there is this picture that I have put up on the screen now, illustrates a story that he retells from the Alexander cycle, in which you have Emperor Alexander, who we all know was one of the world's mightiest warriors and conquerors who traveled from his kingdom eastward and conquered almost more than half of the world. We are familiar with Alexander's conquest or Alexander's arrival in India. According to this story, however, we go further eastward and we reach China. Okay, so Alexander, it is imagined, reached China, and there it was not easy for the Emperor Alexander to establish his reign there. And therefore, it was decided, Alexander decided that he would get into a kind of competition with the Chinese. And in the story, which is called The Duel of the Artists, the writer tells us about the competition that Alexander, or Iskandar, as he is named in this cycle, Sikandar in India, but Iskandar in Arabic and Persian languages. So let us see which people are superior, said Iskandar to the Khan, who was at that time the ruler of China. And he set the terms of the competition. If the Chinese won, then he would return west and leave the Khan and his property unmolested. If, on the other hand, he and his Greek army proved the stronger, Iskandar said, well, you can imagine what will happen next. So saying, the competition began, and the competition was conducted across various events. Okay, you had sports, you had games, you had all kinds of intellectual competitions and so on. But what happened was, the Chinese were keeping up with the Greeks in such a way that it was not easy for them to come to a consensus or to a result. Nothing could separate the talents of the gifts and the abilities of the sportsmen, the musicians, the dancers, the philosophers, the astrologers, all of them. In all these competitions, the results were nil, or same to same, draw. And finally, it came to the turn of the artists. Okay, and they decided that the competition involving the artists would take place in a cave, in a rock cave. They divided the cave in such a way that a huge curtain was placed right across the middle of the cave so that one side would not be able to see the other side. And on one side, you had the Greeks, using the wall of the cave in order to depict or make a painting. And the Chinese were expected to do it on the other side. And at the end of 3 days, they would see which one was the masterpiece. So you have Iskandar going and motivating his painters, his artists, and ensuring the completion of the work. Iskandar's artists spent the first day preparing the paints. On the second day, they turned the rock face into a sprawling courtly scene. And in 3 days' time, you had a brilliant masterpiece painted there on the cave wall, on their side of the cave wall, with the glory and the splendor of Greek civilization, Greek life, their wealth, their riches, the grandeur of the civilization was depicted there, including an image of Alexander himself. And they added the finest details to it, bringing life into each living thing that was depicted in the painting. When Iskandar entered the cave, he laughed with joy because he was sure that nothing could surpass this accomplishment. The Chinese artists would definitely not be able to match the brilliance of his artist's painting. And so he now decided to call the Khan and to draw the curtain so that they could see what the Chinese had drawn on the other side. The curtain was drawn, torchlight filled the cave, and then everyone gasped in disbelief to see what the Chinese had done on the other side. Iskandar or his people just couldn't believe it. The Chinese had painted the exact same mural, the wall painting on the cave wall, The same animals, the same men, the same trees, the same mountains, the same rivers, the same throne and the same crown and the same emperor too. And how did that happen? It was because they had made a reflection. The Chinese artists had shaved and polished the wall to such a fine degree that their side of the rock became a mirror, and it could reflect down to the tiniest detail whatever the Greeks had done. And they could just watch it in amazement, and Iskandar just decided to bid goodbye and leave the Chinese artists to their victory. Now, this is a story that has been narrated in many lands by many writers, as I told you. And for me, it has been interpreted differently too. For me, this is a story that tells us about reading. What the men of Alexander, what the Greeks did there was the writing. And what the Chinese did there was the reading. They read and read whatever had been written for them. They became such fine readers that they could reflect the greatness of what they read. And that is the message that I would like to convey to you at the beginning of the session. You are what you read. You become what you read. It is for you to decide what you want to read, and that you will become. Now, how do I communicate this message to you? I think the best possible manner would be to take you back to your childhood days. Let me first ask you whether you can identify this animal seen here. And as I told you, we're journeying through the forest, and in the forest, we see this animal. Can anyone identify the animal?
Ma'am, is it a jackal?
Very close, not quite the jackal. Okay, it is something that we are not so familiar with it because it's not seen in our part of the world, much as it looks like the wolf or the jackal or the fox or a combination of all these, and the hyena too. This is actually the coyote. Have you heard of the coyote? The coyote is in fact a very integral part of the culture of the native tribes people, or the Indians, the people called the Red Indians, and other tribes people in the North and the South of America. In the forests there, you have the Red Indians and other tribes people who worship the coyote, for whom the coyote is a very magical animal. Unlike what the coyote is to us, as we are familiar with it in this cartoon series. Haven't you all watched this cartoon series? Aren't you familiar with the Roadrunner series? I do not know if it is still on. When my daughter grew up, this was one of the most popular cartoon series. And this was something that always left me thinking, because in this, you have the Roadrunner, the bird is there, the clever, it's just like the Tom and Jerry series where whatever Tom does, we would think that Tom is more powerful, but it is always Jerry Mouse who wins. And in a similar manner, whatever this coyote, whose name is Wile E. Coyote, that is his name, whatever he does, he always ends in trouble. All his plans end in failure because the cartoon depicts him as somebody who has not done enough homework. He has not prepared himself well, and therefore all his plans will fail. That's another part of the story. But it is the bird who always wins, and this coyote keeps falling into danger, into trouble, in exactly the way that Tom in Tom and Jerry falls. My interest in this cartoon is the way in which this coyote has been depicted. The coyote, which, as I told you, is so significant to the native Indian population that they almost worship it. They revere it. For them, The coyote is something that represents their tradition and their culture. And when the white people, the white Americans, the rich, powerful white Americans who made America their own, they were actually Europeans. They were travelers who came from Europe, but they exterminated the population, the native population, and they made the land their own. They were actually colonizers, they actually colonized the land. And in that process, they wanted to wipe away the native customs, native traditions, which they wanted to depict as barbarian, barbaric, and uncivilized. It is in that process that this animal, which is of such great significance to the native population, gets a name called Wile E. Coyote. When you read it together, it always becomes Wile Coyote. Wily is a word which conveys evil, which conveys, it's seen as an object of fear, as an object of revulsion, which you need to keep away, which you need to keep off bounds. This is how they created an object of fear and hatred out of something that had great reverence for the natives. Now, this is something that happens not just in cartoons. When you look at the fairy tales that each one of you would have grown up with, when you look at the myths and the stories that were told to us, narrated to us as little children, you have a whole world of fairy tales out there. Just look at the patterns, the common patterns that are repeated in these fairy tales. You have the coyote-like animal, always presented as an object of danger. Beauty and the Beast, for example. The Beast is to be ridiculed, to be hated. He's an object of revulsion, and he becomes acceptable only when he transforms from a beast into a human being, a white human being. See how racist these stories are. When you look at the girls, again, look at the stereotyped patterns that are repeated in these stories. You have young girls who are told that they should not stray, as you have in the story of Little Red Riding Hood. You have the wolf, the object of fear, who is out there to eat you. So you always need to walk along a straight path and you will reach safety. It's not just in fairy tales from the West. നമ്മളുടെ സ്വന്തം കഥകളിലും we have heard about ഇലമുള്ളിൽ വീണാലും മുള്ള ഇലയിൽ വീണാലും കേട് ഇലയ്ക്ക് തന്നെയാണ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന. It is the same idea which is conveyed by these damsels, the stories of the damsels in distress, who always in every story will have to be rescued by the Prince Charming. And the Prince Charming has his own features. He's a tall, handsome, white man. The natives are always made the outsider. Think of the Mahabharata stories. Think of characters like Ekalavya, the forest dwellers who are kept away. They're never brought into the mainstream. Think of a character like Karna, the outsider, who was born in a lower community and therefore who was a member of a lower community, and therefore the class division and the caste division comes in there and makes him an outsider. The women are always helpless maidens who need to be protected by the men around them. So my question is, why do we have these stereotyped patterns in these stories, which always end with the famous line, and they lived happily ever after? Who lived happily ever after? The man and the woman. The man marries the woman and she lives happily ever after. Why? Because she has achieved the goal of her life. And what is that goal? Marriage. Isn't that so? That is the kind of conditioning that we are exposed to in childhood. We are told stories, fairy tales, myths, which always have these recurring stereotyped patterns, where some people are to be worshipped, some others are to be hated, where some people always need protection. And I have brought in this only to remind you that as long as we live in this world of fairy tales, as long as we live in a world which tells us that a girl has to be rescued by the Prince Charming and that she can live happily ever after only if she gets married, if we continue to read only stories that tell us that these forest dwellers are to be kept outside and the world or the forest out there is for man, like the woodcutter, to chop and use for his personal use, then we will continue to live in that flat world where you have no growth and no development, because you will aspire only to be like these Snow Whites, these Cinderellas, these Alice in Wonderlands, these little Red Riding Hoods, who are always conditioned to behave in a particular manner. It is when youngsters are forced to live in these fairy tale existences that you have tragedies occurring, like the one that recently, that just 2 days back shook our state, where a girl believed that marriage was the ultimate aim of her life and she could not leave that happily ever after state even when she was being tortured. It is such a sad state of affairs that even after that incident, we kept hearing about young, precious lives being lost, being snuffed out, all because of the conditioning that they have been receiving and the belief that has been injected into them that life will be a fairy tale, life will be a bed of roses if you do not stray, if you do not dare to dream, if you do not disobey, if you do what society expects you to do. I think each one of you should think about that and realize that it just does not do for us to, it just will not do for us to dwell in that world of illusion created by fairy tales. We need to go out of it. We need to grow out of it. In other words, for too long, we have been listening to stories told to us, where we remained mute and passive, and stories were injected into us, stories were told to us. But now we need to come out. We need to start reading. We need to graduate from being mute listeners to being active readers, because reading is what will empower you. There is no doubt about the fact that a child who reads will be an adult who thinks, and that is the adult that each one of you should become. Think, as Krishnan sir mentioned at the beginning, not just to expand your horizons and know more about the world outside, but also to think, to question, to engage in critical thinking, which will make you ask questions. Why? Why not? Why should I? Why this? And why not that? I think it's very important for us to keep asking questions for our own benefit, because otherwise we will remain mere puppets living in those illusory fairy tales. A child who reads will be an adult who thinks, because, as it was mentioned so beautifully by the great Greek writer Menander in those early times, those who can read and those who will read will see twice as well. This is the message that I would like to communicate to you, because when you read, your vision doubles. When you read, you begin to see the other side. When you listen, you only get to see one side, the flat one side, where all your dreams and aspirations are suppressed. Because You lack the power to think, and you just consume and consume and consume and remain mute, passive consumers all your life. But you need to move out. You need to move out. You need to question and look at anything, any situation that you are in from every possible angle. And that kind of holistic, all comprehensive vision is something that can best be given by books, by reading. Nothing else can quite give you the kind of all-sided vision that books give you. Because when you read books, you are engaging with some of the best minds that have ever lived, who can enable you to think beyond all known limits. I would like to quote the words of Salman Rushdie at this juncture in his recent book, Languages of Truth, which is a collection of essays that he wrote from the year 2003 to 2020 and which was released recently. He keeps talking about the way he writes. If you're familiar with Salman Rushdie's stories, you know that most of his stories and most of the stories that he loves reading are ones that have been told at some point of time. But he keeps revisiting them, he keeps rereading them and writing them anew. If you are familiar with a novel like Quixote, which was his immediate preceding novel, it is a retelling of Don Quixote. Cervantes, a Spanish classic, Don Quixote. A Quixote for all ages. It is Salman Rushdie's retelling of the Quixote story for our times. And Rushdie says in this brilliant book of essays that it is very important for us to keep visiting, revisiting, and rereading the stories, the classics that we have grown up on. Because, as he says, when one lives at a hinge moment in history, as we do now, at a moment when everything is in flux, he's of course referring to the present situation that the entire world is in, everything is changing at immense speed. When the future is up for grabs and dark storm clouds rush across the sun, and when there are plagues and dragons loose in the world, then it becomes essential to admit that the old forms will not do. You just cannot remain listeners. You need to read. The old ideas will not do, because all must be remade. All, with our best efforts, must be rethought, reimagined, and rewritten. And to do otherwise would be to fail. And when they rewrite, we need to reread too. I have put up in the next two slides just some of the well-known examples of stories that have been retold for our times, which we reread and therefore realize that there are things other than those which were told to us. A novel like Yajna, for example, written by the Oriya writer Pratibha Rai, is one which looks at the entire Mahabharata from the perspective of Draupadi. Draupadi, who otherwise is a mute victim, largely a mute victim in many a Mahabharata story, who is at the mercy of all others there. Why not tell the story from Yajna point, from Draupadi's point of view, asked Pratibha Rai, and we get a new insight into the Mahabharata. The same happens when the Mahabharata is retold from the point of view of Ekalavya or Shakuntala. Shakuntala's story is also one of the Mahabharata stories, even though it does not involve the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Shakuntala story, the eminent historian Romila Thapar has written about the retellings of Shakuntala and how we need to rediscover the original Shakuntala, who somehow got lost in the translations, which always had some other agenda. Similarly, Circe, which must be a very popular work among many of you who are followers of some of the important, very popular series and a retelling of Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey from the perspective of Circe. Many Ramayanas written by Paula Richmond tells us about the multitudes of Ramayanas. Why is it that we always get to read only one version, or to think that this is the Ramayana? In this great work, she tells us about the various versions of these stories in which, things are not as they have been taught to us. You begin to question some of the pitfalls that the original stories lay for us. The pitfalls which are always advantageous only to certain people and always disadvantageous to certain others. We need to be aware of the fact that there are many, many Ramayanas. We need to be aware of the fact that the Mahabharata story, when narrated from Bhimasena's perspective, would be very different from the one that is narrated from Sri Krishna's or Arjuna's perspective. Some of the greatest classics of the 20th century literature, Ulysses by James Joyce, for example, is a retelling of the original Greek story. The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot's immense epic on life in the 20th century. He goes back to the classics and the myths and the legends that he had heard, that mankind has heard always, and retells it for the present. You can think of cinematic adaptations of classics like the Shakespearean classics adapted in different languages of the world. You can think of post-colonial readings of Shakespearean texts like the one done by Amy Césaire. You can read a book like The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, which retells all the fairy tales. You do not have damsels who are always locked up in high towers like Rapunzel there and who are in distress. You do not have to wait for the Prince Charming to come and save you, but you have it in you. You have that individuality in you. You have the power to think and to decide for yourself. You look at the native's point of view in Amy Césaire's work. So this is the kind of transformation, I think, that reading can effect in you. And that is a transformation that you need to empower yourself, to empower your future. It is important, therefore, that we go back to the repositories of stories that have been told to us and reread them. In other words, carry the library of stories that we have grown up on and rearrange them, reread them, and rewrite them for ourselves. The image that I have here is that of a unique library, one which, according to this book written by Eduardo Galeano, the Uruguayan writer, who gives us reinterpretations of the calendar itself. This is a book which is called Children of the Days, where each day of the calendar is rewritten from other perspectives. And in one of the days, he says, throughout the history, he talks about the 3rd of January, on which the famous library of Alexandria was burned. In a similar manner, you had the Americans burning the precious libraries of Iraq during the Gulf War. He says, this has always happened. There will always be the victors who try to conquer by destroying the books, by destroying the traditions, by destroying the culture of the natives. Throughout the history of humanity, only one refuge kept books safe from war and conflagration: the walking library, an idea that occurred to the Grand Vizier of Persia, Abdul Qasim Ismail, at the end of the 10th century. When the books were about to be burned, he decided to save them. How? He made the library travel with him by placing them on his camels. He kept his library with him. 117,000 books, not a small figure at all. 117,000 books aboard 400 camels formed a caravan a mile long. The camels were also the catalogue. They were arranged according to the titles of the books they carried, a flock for each of the 32 letters of the Persian alphabet. It is important to carry our libraries with us, living as you do in a digital world. Digital natives as you, my dear young friends, you have this immense privilege of carrying in your little devices, in your phones, in your mobiles, in your laptops, huge entire libraries. Remember, these are the libraries, these are the volumes that you have to keep going back to. Stories can make you grow in a way that nothing else can. Reading can empower you because each time you read is a rereading, and rereadings are integral to any person's growth. I would like to stop there by taking you to the first image that we began with, that forest, which is called Framtid's Bibliotheket. What does that mean? The library of the future in the Norwegian language. This is a forest that has been planted for a specific purpose. You have these coniferous trees coming up there, the spruces coming up there. Thousands of trees have been planted. A new forest has been created, and they will continue there for 100 years. This is a project which was launched in the year 2014, and in 2114, by which time all of us would have bid goodbye to this world, this forest will be used, or the wood in this forest will be used. Why? To print 100 books, unpublished books. From the year 2014 onwards, each year, one writer from different parts of the world contribute a book that is kept in a secret library. Margaret Atwood, the Canadian writer, was the one who contributed the first. I think now there are about 7 books or so, 7. Yeah, 7. The last person who contributed the book was the Korean writer, Han Kim. So each year, one writer will contribute. These books are in manuscript form. Nobody other than the author have read those books. These books will be taken out 100 years later in 2114, and then the wood from these trees will be used to make a 100-book anthology. It is, I think, something that is beautiful, which tells us about the continued relevance of stories, the importance of carrying our stories from the past into our present and into our future. As Atwood said when she handed over her book, she said, to read and decipher my book at that point of time, 100 years hence, you might need an archaeologist, because language would have changed, language would have evolved to such an extent that what I have now written in manuscript form would only be deciphered by somebody who is an expert in that field. I think it is something that makes us think and rethink the importance of books in the past, the present, and the future. So I would just like to leave you with that message. Let us take the libraries into the present and carry them into our future. It is very, very important that we keep reading and rereading the books that we listened to as we were children, and the books that we need to reread. Okay, thank you. I wish you a wonderful time reading and rereading.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, madam. And now we have 10 minutes more. Excellent students, you can interact with the madam if you want to clarify any doubts related to reading or the today presentation. You can ask questions. You can interact with madam.
I hope the session made sense to you.
Ma'am, I'm Anjali Krishna is of class 9B. Ma'am, how can we improve our reading skill and learning experience?
Keep reading, Anjali, that is all. There's nothing else. I mean, it's not something that can be taught. You know, reading is something that you grow up doing. And I would only suggest keep reading. I think your attitude towards books must be one of, you know, you enter a book as you would enter a new land. There's something that you discover. Each book, every book that has been written, however big or small, however old or new, however trashy or rich or whatever be the stage, every book has something to offer you. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it, you may question it, but each experience, you know, is something that you need to live through in order to gain the best out of it. It may be a book that you do not like, and therefore what do? You are forming, your taste is being formed. You are questioning that book, which is also a very important stage of your growing up. So just change your perspective on books and realize that even your textbooks, even the books that do not interest you, the books that interest you, the books that delight you, each work has something to give you.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anyone want to talk? Anyone to please ask?
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah, good morning.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Ma'am, you mentioned the title of a book. The content is something about calendar.
Yeah, it is called Eduardo Galeano, Children of the Days. Is it visible?
That is, yeah.
Children of the Days.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's very interesting. You know, he looks at the calendar from the native, from the South American point of view. And the first, January 1st, you know, for us, we would think that it is New Year's Day. Suppose you have a book, calendar book, January 1 is New Year's Day. But this is what he says. Today is not the first day of the year for the Mayans, the Jews, the Arabs, the Chinese, or many other inhabitants of the world. We observe it as the New Year's Day only because the Western world, the Roman civilization, you know, which changed the history of the world, told us that we need to observe this as New Year's Day. So each day is thereby questions, and you get a new insight into each day in history. What you do not normally reckon, what you do not normally hear about is mentioned by him. And again, from the perspective of the outsider, the native, the forest dweller, the people who are always marginalized, whose voices are never heard. So, you know, reading is something that enables us to hear those unheard voices.
Unheard voices, diversity.
Diversity, exactly.
That is the diversity. It's also written well by Amartya Sen. It's
The argumentative
Indians.
Yeah.
One chapter is exclusively for the calendars and related to the folk tradition. The Ramanujan book also. That is also a very interesting Indian folk tradition. And also what Madam quote by the Rumila Thakur's study on Shakuntala.
Shakuntala, exactly.
A lot of studies are now coming.
Right.
And this language change, a recent book by the Peggy Mohan, the linguistic study, how the Indian languages developed. All that's interesting, this diversity.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can see another perspective of the things. Correct.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Anybody want to clarify anything, please? Nobody. Okay. Can we wind up?
Thank you, ma'am, for that speech. That was a wealth of knowledge, and it was good to learn that we have to come out of the fairy tale characters that we have been growing up with.
Yeah.
That was
It's
very
important
interesting.
not to be listeners, we need to read and reread.
Yes, ma'am. So I call upon Nisha, ma'am, TGT English, to thank the gathering. Please, ma'am.
Those who can read see twice as well. I have borrowed this from ma'am's presentation. Bindu ma'am, it was really a privilege. It was such a wonderful time seeing your presentation, seeing your wonderful presentation and the effective messages that were conveyed through that presentation. Thank you so much, ma'am, for spending your valuable time and for introducing us to Frank Ted's Biblioticket. Thank you so much, ma'am. And the effectiveness of your presentation, I think it was obvious with that the number of students who had attended the program. Even at the end of the program, we had about 96 students, which was never seen in the programs before. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you so much.
Okay,
My pleasure, ma'am.
thank you.
On behalf of the entire KV family, I once again thank ma'am. I also thank our students, Meghna Nath and Angel Maria Catherine, who had risen up to this occasion at a very short notice. It was just informed to them yesterday, and it was wonderful, children, to see you both present so well. Thank you so much.
Well done, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues, for attending the program and for your cooperation. And my dear students, thank you all. Thank you for your cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wish everyone the very best.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, madam.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.